Welcome to Daily English Room. Today's topic is books. Do you enjoy reading books?
Oh yes, I'm an avid reader. As a university student, I read both for my studies and for pleasure. Reading helps me understand different perspectives on environmental issues.
What kind of books do you usually read?
I read a lot of environmental science textbooks and journals for my studies, but I also enjoy African literature and books about climate activism. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is my favorite author.
Do you prefer physical books or e-books?
I prefer e-books for my academic reading because they're searchable and I can easily highlight important passages. But for leisure reading, I love the feel of physical books.
How often do you find time to read?
Being a university student means my reading time is quite varied. During term time, I spend about 4 hours daily reading academic materials, but I always reserve at least an hour before bed for pleasure reading. During breaks, I probably read about 5 hours a day. I love finding a quiet spot in the botanical gardens on campus and spending the whole afternoon there with a good book.
Do you like to discuss books with others?
Definitely. I'm very active in my university's environmental science book club, where we discuss both academic texts and environmental literature. It's fascinating because we have students from different countries, so we often compare environmental challenges and solutions from various perspectives. I also run a small online book club focused on African literature and environmental writing. We recently had an amazing discussion about how traditional African storytelling addresses environmental conservation.
What was your favorite book when you were a child?
My favorite was Tales by Moonlight, a collection of Nigerian folk tales. My grandmother would read it to me in both English and Yoruba, which really helped me appreciate the richness of bilingual storytelling. The stories often featured themes about respecting nature and living in harmony with the environment, which probably sparked my early interest in environmental science. I still have that book, and the environmental messages in those simple stories feel more relevant than ever.
Have you ever given a book as a gift? What was it?
Books are my favorite gifts to give. For Earth Day, I gave my study group copies of Silent Spring. It's a classic environmental text that really influenced my thinking. I also recently gave my younger sister a collection of contemporary African women writers, because I believe it's important to see ourselves represented in literature.
Do you like reading books in different languages?
Growing up in Nigeria gave me a natural advantage with languages. I read in English, Yoruba, and some French. Environmental science papers are usually in English, but I love reading African literature in both English and Yoruba. The way environmental themes are expressed in different languages can be quite revealing. Some concepts about nature and conservation just feel more powerful in certain languages.
Has your taste in books changed over the years?
My reading habits have evolved considerably. In secondary school, I mostly read fiction and fashion blogs. When I first started my environmental science degree, I focused heavily on scientific texts and journals. Now, I'm finding a balance. I read academic materials, but I'm also deeply interested in indigenous environmental knowledge and traditional African perspectives on conservation. I've also started reading more climate fiction, cli-fi. It's fascinating to see how authors imagine our environmental future.
How do you choose which books to read next?
I have a pretty diverse approach to choosing books. For my environmental studies, I follow several scientific journals and their recommended reading lists. For African literature, I'm part of an online book club where we vote on monthly readings. I also love discovering new environmental writers through climate activism networks. Recently, I've started following more indigenous authors who write about traditional environmental knowledge.
Do you take notes while reading?
Oh yes, my books are full of notes. For academic reading, I use a digital note-taking system with color-coded highlights, green for key theories, blue for important data, and yellow for potential research ideas. For environmental literature, I keep a journal where I connect different authors' perspectives on climate change. I also note down powerful quotes that I might use in my activism work.
What's your favorite place or time to read?
The university's botanical garden is my absolute favorite reading spot. I found this perfect bench under a huge baobab tree. It's quiet and inspiring to read about environmental issues while surrounded by nature. During exam periods, I love studying in the environmental science department's library late at night. At home, I've created a small reading nook with plants and natural light.
Have you ever started a book but couldn't finish it?
I tried reading a very technical book about climate modeling in my first year, but it was beyond my understanding at that time. I felt quite discouraged, but my professor suggested starting with more basic texts first. Now, 3 years later, I've actually gone back to that book and can understand it much better. It taught me that sometimes the timing needs to be right.
Do you have any reading goals for this year?
My reading goals are quite ambitious this year. I aim to read 30 academic papers about environmental conservation, 12 books about traditional African environmental practices, and at least 20 articles about current climate initiatives. I'm also challenging myself to read more environmental literature from other developing nations to compare their experiences with ours.
What was the last book you recommended to someone?
Last month, I recommended Braiding Sweetgrass to my entire environmental science study group. It beautifully combines scientific knowledge with indigenous wisdom about nature. It's generated some fascinating discussions about how we can integrate traditional Nigerian environmental practices into modern conservation efforts.
How has reading helped you in your career or studies?
Reading has been essential for my environmental science studies and activism. Academic papers keep me updated on climate research, while books about environmental movements have shaped my approach to advocacy. Last semester, I used concepts from various conservation books to develop a community recycling project. Reading has also helped me understand how environmental issues affect different communities globally.
Do you remember the first book you read in English?
My first full English book was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Though I grew up speaking English, reading literature was different from conversational English. This book was special because it bridged my Nigerian heritage with English literature. Now I often reference it when discussing how environmental changes affect traditional communities.
How do you make time for reading despite your busy schedule?
I've developed a strict reading schedule around my university timetable. I read academic papers early in the morning when my mind is fresh, usually from 5:30 to 7 a.m. Between lectures, I read environmental news on my phone, and I dedicate Sunday afternoons to reading environmental literature. During exam periods, I join study groups where we discuss environmental science texts together.
Have you ever read a book that changed your perspective on life?
The Great Green Wall completely shifted my perspective on environmental solutions. It showed me how traditional African approaches to conservation can be combined with modern environmental science. This book inspired my current research project about indigenous conservation practices in Nigeria.
Do you have a favorite book series?
I'm passionate about the Green Africa series by various African environmentalists. Each book explores environmental challenges and solutions from different African perspectives. What makes this series special is how it combines scientific data with traditional ecological knowledge. I've used many concepts from these books in my environmental activism.
What do you think about book adaptations, movies, TV shows?
I find documentary adaptations of environmental books particularly powerful. When I watched the adaptation of Silent Spring, seeing the visual evidence of environmental damage had a different impact than reading about it. However, I think the books usually provide more detailed scientific explanations and solutions. Recently, I've started a campus club where we read environmental books and watch their adaptations to compare their effectiveness in conveying environmental messages.
What book would you like to read next?
I'm excited to start reading Indigenous Environmental Justice. It examines how different indigenous communities worldwide approach environmental conservation. I think it will help me better understand how to integrate traditional Nigerian environmental practices into modern conservation efforts.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to start reading more?
I'd say connect your reading to your passions. If you care about climate change, start with environmental books that address your specific concerns. Also, create a reading circle with friends. We discuss one environmental book each month, which keeps us accountable and provides different perspectives.
If you could write a book, what would it be about?
I'd write a book about young African environmentalists who are combining traditional knowledge with modern science to address climate change. It would showcase innovative projects across the continent and provide a blueprint for sustainable development that respects both nature and cultural heritage.
That's all for today's daily English Room conversation practice. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this video, like, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button. See you next time.